this study, I think this is week 5, the church and the kingdom of God and impact on America's legacy of housing segregation. This one, I wanted to talk specifically about the challenge of white Christian allies in a fight against systemic racism, using this as one of those things. So what we just did in these last 5 minutes or so is to just throw out scriptures and Christian context that would justify this type of Bible study, this type of integrated Bible study. And what it all comes down to is that the church as the Christian community is not to just be what is those people, the monks, right? Those what's that type of Christianity when they go into monasteries and stuff like that. You had a time of in early Christendom that they thought like holiness was getting away from everybody and just being by themselves. No, he says, I've left you in the world. We, as if God didn't want us to impact and influence the world, he would have just took us home. But no, he left us to usher in the kingdom of God. So we can't just we can't be, well, we're gonna just get on our little corner and we're gonna talk about whatever that people have sanctioned off as the only quote unquote Christian issues. These are Christian issues. They're issues that are, because first of all, practically speaking, because guess what? In America, this has not, it hasn't been that if you were a Christian that you were shielded from this. No. And this is the problem with segregation, is that Black Christians have to deal with the same issues that generally Black people have to deal with. I was just talking about this I was on a podcast with for Wheaton and last week, and I was talking about the same thing. I said, listen, when it's all said and done, nope. When I'm driving down the street, unless I'm in my neighborhood, unless I'm in the West Pullman Rosen where officers know me, they don't see pastor laws. They just see a black man, a 6-foot black man with dreads. They don't see, in fact, I've said, they don't even see Dr. laws. They don't see you with a PhD. So that all of this kind of things, like, that's inconsequential. It's just, the truth of the matter is, because America is still highly segregated, Black Christians typically are in the same neighborhood as other Black folks, and we cannot just withdraw. Amen. In fact, it has been that very thing that has caused some of the younger generation to leave the church. So, all right, that's just setting the thing. What I'm gonna do in this, so what I want to do, I want to trace a particular group, and these are the Quakers. And we'll probably Quakers, Mennonites, they're all kind of that same group. They, for the most part, they there's no difference in their beliefs. In one of the major things is that they are Quakers and Mennonites, usually Mennonites more so, but they're like pacifists. They don't believe in war or none of those kind of things. But one of the big things is that they're very skeptical about power. They're skeptical about people in power and their ability to abuse it. And they try to, and so. And the Quakers have always been, for the longest time, there's always been one of our biggest allies when it comes to racism. Some of your first abolitionists were Quakers. One of my favorite white abolitionists is William Lloyd Garrison. He was a Quaker. They were just different. They were different. And you know what, though? What I appreciate about it is that was them saying, I'm going to put my Christianity into practice. So today I want to summarize a chapter by kind of telling you the story and so let me kind of tell the story a little bit. It's on your things. I'll read it, and it's on your handouts. And then we are going to. I want you to pay attention to a few things as I summarize this. I want you to pay attention to the type of what's the word I'm looking for? Participation, or the type of involvement that these Quakers had in trying to curb this systemic discrimination against Black folks when housing. Then I want you to pay again. Want you to pay attention to some of the ploys or some of the tactics that the government on a local level tried to do to prevent Black folks from getting homes after the Black folks got over, in this particular community, got over the hump of financial support. So one line of support is deny FHA loans, and most people can't afford a conventional loan. So FHA, VA loans, those are the next thing. So that was one of the big things. We've talked about that, how the government specifically kept Black folks from getting these loans. But the Quakers, we're going to find out how the Quakers kind of found a way around that. And then the local government then put some other things in place. So the money wasn't an issue. Now there were some other places. I want y'all to pay attention to these two things. And then we're going to go back to Philippians 2. All right, y'all ready to roll with me?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. So during World War II, around 1943, a new Ford Motors plant opened to build parts for the war in one of the suburbs of Oakland, California. And we already talked about this. They were doing this in various parts of the country. The government gave many FHA and VA loans to many whites to provide housing for war workers, but only for white ones, right? So remember, all of the expenses and stuff was going to fund World War II, and we just needed input and to support that. And so Ford Motors Company was kind of building tanks and building different stuff, and they needed people. They had workers coming from all over the country to come up north, to go west, and they needed people. They needed housing for their workers, and these workers had been nicknamed essentially war workers. They've been contracted by the government because Ford Motors and some of these other places have been contracted by the government. But the people who was able to get these FHA loans, for the most part, were mass developers. One of the mass developers who got the loans to build these homes was a guy by the name of David Bohannon. And David Bohannon was just essentially responsible for he was one of the biggest developers in the country, and was responsible for one of the major segregating of neighborhoods. So that's that. And one of the biggest units that he built was the San Lorenzo Village, 5 miles south of Oakland, where where Black folks were. A lot of Black folks were even back then. It had 5,000 units and 17,000 residents, and this is all for white folks. And the deeds had restrictive. They're supposed to be restrictive, not restrive. Restrictive covenants that they could not be resold to Black people. So these were some of the things about, you buy a house or whatever, or they deny FHA loans to Black folks, and then white folks are bought in these subdivisions. Homeowners associations were able to put restrictive covenants. First of all, these oftentimes come with restrictive covenants anyway. So it could be like, you may not be able to put a pool in your house. That might be part of, if you go to the Cook County's clerk website and look up, the history of your house and try to look up your deed, there might be certain restrictive covenants. You can't put a pool, or you may not be able to, add a second story, or you can only have, there's just all kinds of different things. Even in some cases, the color that you can paint your house, or if you can use your house for business, and it just depends on the neighborhood. So that's kind of natural anyway, but the difference was they put racial stuff in their restrictive covenants. It couldn't be resold to Black people. Okay, so no developer would build an interracial division for war workers. So a Quaker group, and that Quaker group is the American Friends Service Committee, and sometimes Quakers will even, like, their name is, they was the Friends, capital F. But the American Friends Service Committee, working with the United Auto Workers Union of the Ford Company, began to try to get someone to finance an interracial subdivision. People wouldn't give black folks homes. They definitely wouldn't do, they might do some project housing, do some renting or something, but they definitely wouldn't do interracial subdivisions. So the Quakers, said, no, this ain't right. This ain't Jesus. This ain't what Jesus is about. So they working with the UAW, United Auto Workers, the union of this particular Ford company in California, and they said, we're going to get interracial subdivision homes. I mean, this is crazy. We got workers. My brother works right alongside of me in the Ford plant, but he got to travel because they would have to travel an hour to work one way, and live in in some cases in a crowded project housing or whatever, and then try to go to work and go back, while these other folks, white folks, are getting houses built 5 miles from the plant so that they can live there. And so they like, no, this is crazy. So this Christian group said, no, we're gonna change it. They couldn't find anyone in San Francisco or San Jose or anyone in that area to fund it, though. So one of the leaders of the Quaker group flew to New York to meet with the vice president of MetLife, the insurance and broker community, a broker institution. And the VP was also a Quaker. And he pretty much said, listen, come on, this is Jesus, I'm a Quaker, you're a Quaker. We got the same beliefs. Ain't nobody else is going to fund this thing. What Jesus will have us to do. And so the VP, vice president, he issues a loan for the development. When the builder's intent, though, when the Quakers and the United Auto Workers, in this case, headed by the loan development by the VP, when the intent that where it would be an interracial development got out, the city and county governments blocked it in multiple ways. So here's one. The Santa Clara Board of Supervisors rezoned the site from residential to industrial use. The Quaker group found a second plot then. Okay, fine. So they got another plot. Then the city officials of Mountain View, where they got the second plot, said they would never grant the necessary approvals. Okay. Then they found another plot. When the town officials found out this, they increased the minimum plot size. And this is kind of like rezoning from 6,000 square feet to 8,000. And the problem was, in other words, if you're going to build something, it's going to have to be the minimum of 8,000 square feet. And to do that meant it was going to be more cost. It was going to be, and in order to compensate for the cost, they was going to have to charge the war workers more, and they couldn't afford it. So that stopped, that steamrolled that. Then they got a fourth plot. And the seller of the land council, once he found out that it was going to be integrated, then the VP just gave up. He says, I tried. Mm-hmm. Jesus ain't gonna blame me. I tried. I did this thing, right? And that's, again, and listen, that's more than a lot of folks was doing. So VP goes back to his thing. United Auto Workers and American Friends Service Committee, this Quaker group, they're still like, no, we want to fight for equitable living for whites and blacks. So there was a developer that had already gotten some land, and he was going to do it. He was going to build it for black workers. And they talked him into making it an integrated development. No, make it integrated, because we found out essentially, if you just make it for black workers, there's going to be so many different things. Eventually, it will be disinvested and all that kind of stuff. So make it integrated. I said, cool. He said, all right, cool, fine. So for 6 months, he couldn't find a lender. The Quaker group went back to MetLife, to the VPs, and said, listen, all right, come on. We got somebody who's going to develop it. He's already been approved, and but we're going to need some other things. We need you to underwrite construction costs. He said, cool, fine. David Bohannon, who was the big segregation that was building all of this stuff, his company started opposing it. And here's another tactic. He published things in the newspaper. And I want y'all to pay attention to these tactics because we're going to come back to them. He had first subdivision in the Bay Area where Negroes' families will be sold homes without discrimination. I want you to, why is that if you're a Black person and you read that, that's good news, isn't it?
It sounds like it.
On the surface, yeah.
Sure. Like, I mean, all right now, headlines, first Bay Area, first subdivision where Negro families, hey y'all, we going to be homeowners. But guess what? White people are also reading that. And so what is, and if you're a white person who's, which most people, because the government had been promoting this for 20, 30 years, right? So people are already indoctrinated by this. The majority of white folks, with the exception of like folks like the Quakers and this group over here, they believe in big segregation. So if you're reading that and you're a segregationist, what are you saying? What are you saying? I need to get the heck up out of here. This is crazy. Socialism, communism is taking over. This is, what's happening to America? America's, this is negative. But I want you to think about this before I move on. Notice how subtle that is, though. It's presented as something good and positive, but you know the implications. And so watch this. And so you read the article and it says, first subdivision in Bay Area where Negro families will be sold homes without discrimination. And what's good news for some, the very same information is bad news for others. This is called dog whistling. You know what a dog whistle is? A dog whistle is an instrument that, when blown, that is inaudible to the human ear. But dogs hear it. And so this is called dog whistling, when you can say something explicit. You can say something and even though it's presented as a good thing, it's always encoded with an under message so that those who have ears to hear will hear.
Yeah.
Right. Did y'all hear Sister Laws?
I didn't hear.
Okay. So she was just essentially kind of just expounding on the dog whistling idea. So she was like, it's been presented as something good for us, but they know, because they've always been taught, Black folks, when they move in, it's going to move. And the government has taught this, right? We've been talking about this.
Neighborhood.
Yeah, it's going to go down the neighborhood and all this kind of stuff. Sure. And so that's what dog whistling does. I mean, this is what Trump did. This is what Jimmy Carter did. This is what, even Bill Clinton did and all that kind of stuff, right? This dog whistling, when you can say certain things, it will tap into a certain type of realm of ideas that people already hold.
Right.
And so when Trump said, "Make America great again," certain folks already knew what he meant by that. We knew it wasn't even good dog whistle because we knew what he meant by it too. Right? So but you say one thing, and guess what? You can always then deny. That's the thing about racism. You can always, because you say one thing, but you mean other things. And you say, well, no, I didn't say that. I don't mean that. Oh, you guys taking it out of context. And so this is going on. So here's another thing. So they publish it in the newspaper and then pressure the city council to prevent construction by denying it access to sewer lines. So Quakers finally got somebody, got a plot of land, got somebody going to underwrite the construction work, but now the city is denied sewer lines, access to sewer lines. You can't build. This is regular zoning stuff. If you ain't get the stuff with the sewer lines, you can't build. So
Right.
So watch this. The sanitation district charged them a fee of $100 per acre. The union and the Quakers got wind of it, and Fed said, fine, okay, cool. We'll continue to build. We'll just estimate that cost and put that in the selling price of the homes so we can continue the project. So prices go up. Black folks, white folks committed to this. Said, fine, we'll pay that a little extra. Go ahead, fine. When Bohannon's company found out that the fee did not deter them, they pressured the sanitation board, on which the mayor of the city sat, to raise the fee to more than 10 times the $100 a fee. The new charge caused the builder to suspend the work. You actually had homes in some cases that were finished, but because because of things with the sewer stuff, nobody can move in. Okay, now let's bring it home, and then we're gonna turn to Philippians 2. So this happened all over the country. This is not just in California. This is happening when you read this chapter. I can't remember what chapter. I think it's chapter 7 or 8. He has examples that is happening all over the country. So that when Black folks do for some reason are able to get the finances, they had these other things, local things. So, and let's bring it home. So in Deerfield, Illinois, in 1959, a similar thing happened. And here's the thing. The author actually doesn't mention this, but I did some more research, and I said, "Oh my goodness!" So guess who was a part of that? The Quakers. The Quakers. So there was a Quaker, the same group, not the same people, but the same group. The American Friends Service Committee in 1959 tried to do an integrated plot in Deerfield. It was about 50 homes, and 10 of those homes would go to African Americans. They had already sectioned that out. They picked Deerfield because Chicago is extremely racist and segregated, and they figure this is far away from stuff. It ain't gonna bring a lot of attention. So they bought this big plot of land, 50 homes, 10 go to African Americans. Without knowing his village, without knowing his plans, the village approved it was a Quaker group and another guy, I can't remember the name, but they approved the plans. They approved the water, the sewer, street plans, everything. So they built 2 model homes, and the word got out about his plans. But let me show you how the word got out. So the Quaker, because the book doesn't talk about it, I had to do some more research. The Quaker group, these are Christians, right? And they, a bunch of naive Christians as they were, they said, okay, cool, you know what, we need more support. So they just kind of naturally thought they can go to some other Christians, and most of the Christians in Deerfield are white. So they went trying to go into some of these leaders, say, hey, this is what we're planning to do. We need you on board. We need like political support, social support, and all that kind of stuff. And so there was one.
That's how the leak got out.
That's how the leak got out. And so, pastors, faith leaders begin to the assumptions that the Quakers had that in this area, that the faith leaders were actually for integration. And so they began to tell them, and then those pastors of these congregations begin to tell their people. Now, here's the thing, Sister Laws raised a good issue, because even as I was going through this information, I assumed one option. Sister Laws brought up another option as I was bringing it up. And I think it's a legitimate option. So option one is, I'm thinking, well, because I know sometimes this is the case. We've got evidence, even in the book, it talked about this. I'm thinking, sometimes you have these pastors who are leading the thing of segregation and and preaching this type of stuff. No, black folks need to stay over. Like this type of stuff is happening all over. But Sister Laws mentioned another option, which is also a legitimate option. Because it didn't in the book, I mean, in this research, it didn't say that the pastors were the ones that were against it. It just said that the pastors were the one that spread the information. So here's the thing. So here's the second option. One option is you have pastors who are against it and they're telling their congregation about it.
Right.
So option two is that you could have pastors for it, but their congregations are against it. Right. That's the option that Sister Laws brought up, and she's absolutely right, because we've had these scenarios on multiple times. I've talked to my white friends who pastor churches, and they'll say, no, Taryn, you just don't know how much freedom you have as a black pastor of your church. They're like, I envy the freedom that black pastors have. White pastors, we say that they'll be coming for our job. Yeah. And I said, well, yeah, that's probably true. And so probably a couple of reasons for that. Number one, in black churches, the pastor has always been more than just a faith leader. It's been a community leader. Yeah. And so we typically have had a high regard for our pastors. I said two, probably, and this is probably true too. The average black church is not right, is small. They're way more, 90-something% of black churches are under 100 people in America. You got these big, and so here's what I'm saying. 40, I could have a because of the wealth differential and financial differentials in black communities and white communities. I said, that thing is this, is that black pastors for the most part ain't getting paid that much. So, just as long as pick up, so you might as well say what's on your mind, because what do, fire you? You ain't, you ain't paying them that much anyway. Right? So right. So you got these type of dynamics going on, but she raises an important point, is that you could have, and there has been scenarios. There's been situations where I have a friend when I went to school with. I remember Chris. What was that? He was in Texas, and I don't know, something was going on politically. I don't know if it was Trump. It might have been right before Trump, but something he had called out, and they had posted, they sent them emails, and they do that anyway, that's fine. You sent him emails, but then they had put something in his yard, like a sign in his yard, and like threaten him and all that kind of stuff. I said, boy, see that, and they end up leaving. And so you kind of get this scenario. I said, no, black folks don't do that to black pastors. I don't know why. We ain't trying to fight you or nothing. We ain't trying to, threaten you. Oh my goodness. So you got those. So you do have these scenarios sometimes where leaders will say, have a Christian conscience and say, no, listen, we got to do better. And then the culture calls them to acquiesce. Anyway, so in Deerfield, the news of integration plans began to spread through faith leaders, and it spread into the church, and people, of course, people who are sitting on these boards, mayors of these councils, they go to these churches, and the plans were stopped. And this is how it was stopped. They decided, the city decided to condemn the property, not condemn in the sense that it was something wrong with it, condemn in the sense that they seized it for public use. And so they turned that into a park. That park, I had the name of it, Floral Park, I think it was. But they turned into a park. And so, and the city can do that, right? They can do things like, if they consider something, this is for public use, eminent domain, they say we want to, we got to seek your property. Would you sell it for us? And you say, well, no, I don't want to sell it. And then they take you to court, and they have to establish in court that it's going to be used for, like, for example, the cultural center, that for President Obama's cultural center. Like the city now has eminent domain, and so the government forces you to sell it, and that happens all the time. And so this is kind of one of those scenarios where they just kind of before you can even just sell it, it's like, well, we're gonna make it into a public thing. We're gonna make it turn into a park. I'm gonna move into Philippians 2, but before we move into Philippians 2, what were some of the tactics used by local governments after they got the money? They had people who's going to build it. They had people, what were some of the tactics used to get rid of to keep Black folks from getting housing? What were some of the tactics?
Changing the law, rezoning.
Yeah. Put it in newspaper, in other words, to create fear. You put it in newspaper to create fear. Yeah. What else?
The sewer line. They said.
Yeah, the sewer lines, right? So there's certain things you need to do to build a house. And so you ain't even thinking about that. You just think about, I got my down payment, I'm working, I've been approved, and now these fools have brought up some stuff about the sewer line.
Yes.
Dog whistling. They had a term for that, Dr. Laws, the overplay for the underlay.
My. All right, Preacher Brown. All of these are part of the things. So listen, so here's the two things I want to, as I transition, I'm going to take about 15 minutes. Two things I want to do. So the good news is that we get to see the Lord at work, right? We see how, like, we see that even in the midst of this, in the Lord, and this is what I love about our God, is that he's always retained a witness. He's always kept for himself a remnant. Oh my goodness, y'all ought to celebrate that. And I don't care how evil this society is, God has always kept for himself a remnant who will seek to do his will. Amen. And so these Quakers, these Christians, from going to the first round, 4 different plots. And they said, fine, we find another one. And then they come up with another. We find another one. They come up with a ploy there. And ultimately, they end up now on the second round in California. They did finally get to do some stuff, but it was after the war had ended, and then the government started pulling out, and it was just kind of one of those things where this disinvestment. So then white people don't want to work. First of all, the job is not there anymore. Ford is no longer there. The economy is not there, and so it's kind of like, okay, now y'all can have these integrated poor neighborhoods. So the Quakers did finally get some stuff, but they went through litigations and trials and all this kind of stuff. And by time, and then it just the war ended in 55, I think, World War II, whatever it was, 56, something like that. And then they but then by that time it was like the stuff was changing. So what first is this though is that I want you to be encouraged that God has always left for some of a remnant. And I would argue that remnant, part of that remnant has been the witness of the Black church. It's been, but in this case, it wasn't the Black church, it was white Christians, the Quakers, who were doing this. Now, here's this though. Here's this. A couple things I want you to draw from that. Number one, I want you to draw from the fact that God does see, and he is touching the hearts and building on using the hearts of people to try to do his will and work in that way. And second thing I want you to glean from that, what if the Quakers had the conviction, well, we're not going to get involved in that. This is social. This is not, what if they said, well, we're just going to quote unquote preach the gospel. No, they said, we're going to live the gospel too. Third thing is this. If you had to speak to them, if you had to say something to encourage them, like let's say we went back in time and Lord allows a time travel, and you see them trying to fight this fight and do these things. What word of encouragement? How would you encourage them, either from scripture or just in general? What would be a word of encouragement you would give to that group, the Quakers?
I would tell them they were doing just that scripture that I gave earlier.
Okay, yeah.
You know, they saw the need and they sought to address it. And in seeking to address it, that's more Jesus-like than most other stuff that's going on out here.
Yeah, I like it. Somebody else, how would you encourage them?
You know what, Dr. Laws, is so sad. It's so sad that the ones that they probably were up against, the whites that they were up against, were consider themselves as Christians.
Yep.
That's the sad part about it.
Sure.
But I probably would let them know, because if I was back then, surely I would be praying for them, and I would let them know that I had been praying for them.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they had my interests, and they were actually acting and looking and doing what Christ has called for us to do. So
That's right. Well, with that, and you use the word interest, in that context, let's go to Philippians 2. I'm gonna see if I can deal with this in about 12 minutes. Philippians 2, let's go back there. So we had mentioned when we talked about, and I would tell them, hey, don't get weary in well-doing.
amen.
Be not weary in well-doing, for you shall reap if you faint not. Yeah. Listen, Philippians 2, we talked about this. So he talks about fellowship. If you want to be in fellowship, if there's any encouragement in Christ, any consolation or love, any fellowship of the Spirit, any affection, compassion, make my joy complete by being of the same mind, maintaining the same love, united in the spirit, intent on one purpose. I told you before that verse, being of the same mind, and it says in the last word phrase, intent on one purpose, it's the same Greek word, the same Greek phrase actually. So it's really be of the same mind, and then it ends being of the same mind as an inclusio. And part of what's in the middle of that inclusio is maintaining the same love. So one of the ways that we can be in fellowship with one another, we don't always have to agree on every little thing, but if we are united in love and have the same love, we can always be in fellowship with one another. Here's the thing though, verses 3 begins to talk about, for verse 1 kind of lays out the means by which fellowship can happen, having the same love. Verse 3 talks about the things that messes up fellowship. I talked about this. That first word, selfishness or selfish ambition, is used earlier in chapter 1, verse 17, to speak of an ambition in which Paul's enemies treat him as competition. Y'all remember that? Yeah. And we said that, see, if I see you as competition, I can never be in fellowship with you. As long as I see you as my competitor, I can never be in fellowship with you. See, and here's the thing. And so one of the things, Philippians 2 begins to talk about unity. But what I want to talk about, and talk about Christian fellowship, but what I want to talk about, as I want to talk about for the next 10 minutes now, I want to talk about how that is abused. Because let me just say it this way. All unity ain't godly unity. Yeah, all unity ain't godly unity, right? And so sometimes in the conversation of Christendom, of Christianity, in order to kind of shut down the conversation about race and racism, we want to just talk about this. Well, we just all ought to be just, they're just dividing. This stuff, the politics. To even have this Bible study, can be considered in certain circles as dividing the body. And the conversation then is, well, we need to focus on unity, and that ain't nothing but that ain't nothing but a way of trivializing. It's just a tactic to say, let's not talk about the other stuff. That's just ignore all of the divisive and sinful things, and that's just only focus on the things that unite us. That is demonic.
Yeah.
All unity ain't godly unity. Do I need to give y'all some examples? Listen, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were united in their thing to kill Jesus, but that wasn't a godly unity. All unity ain't godly unity. And one of the ways that this unity can be ungodly is actually from an abuse from verse 3 and verse 4. See, verse 3 then recognizes that there's a context by which fellowship cannot happen. And what that is, the context of which you see me as competition. One of the problems of America that has to deal with, even white Christian America, is that whiteness has been used as a mark of superiority, which then means that Black folks have become public enemy number one. White Christians and Black Christians will always have a very difficult thing of having true fellowship as long as whiteness makes you see me, even as a Black Christian, as a competitor. When my skin is competition to you, when my skin is considered a weapon, it's not because of anything I've done, but because of your own proclivities and your own distorted thinking, then we will always have a challenge where we can't have true Christian fellowship. But here's the thing, it goes on and then shows you how to usher in Christian fellowship. He says, verse 4, do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but for the interests of others. Part of Christian fellowship, and what it definitely ought to look like, listen, Christians ought to be able to look out for the in America, for the interests of other Christians, particularly in a context where my racial, social, economic status can cause you and cause us to have very different lives, simply because, not because we're Christian, but because of race and other factors, gender. Are y'all with me so far?
Yes.
So this is not merely, and here, this is how the abuse, here's what the racism has done, even to the Black Christian, where we then are taught to look out for the interests of white folks, but white folks are not taught necessarily to look out for the interests of Black folks. And when it does happen, it's like a move of God. It's the remnant. It's God is just doing something. He's doing some things that are just different in the hearts of people. But institutionally and culturally, it is not taught. One of the words I want to introduce or present is one of the things that gets in the way of Christian fellowship is this idea of white priority.
Yeah.
We talk about white privilege, but white priority, that kind of similar, says that anything good, white folks get it first. Best pay, best houses, right priority. In fact, it is not even the priority is in some cases exclusionary, because as soon as we start getting that, it doesn't matter if I'm a Christian or not. As soon as we start getting this, there's, oh man, something's happening. The world, now comes the dog whistling. What's happening to America? Yeah. But they do it to us. They do it to Latinos and stuff. They're taking our jobs and all that kind of. The dog whistling starts happening now, and it's because guess what? And this is how they're able to get away from it. We've shown in these last few weeks how the government. It wasn't white folks pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps. It was a government making it extremely easy for them. Extremely easy for them to move up and to get and to have access to things from the federal level to the local level, right? And then so you didn't do it based off of your own merit and responsibility. And then what you do then is, when I don't have it, you say, well, I mean, when are you gonna start blaming others? When are you going to take some personal responsibility? Y'all didn't take personal responsibility. Y'all
Right,
didn't
right.
do this. Y'all didn't pull yourself off of your own bootstraps. You had a whole bunch of help.
Yeah.
And so
and
what they're able to do then is then to say, is to make it that whatever's going on in our communities, whatever's going on, it's y'all fault. And the abuse is this. And so what Black folks end up doing, and we've been conditioned to do, is to, in some cases, because this is what racism does, this is the internalized racism, is that we start to then not only adopt the same attitudes. I got 2 minutes. We started the same attitudes towards our own people, but not only that, we can without knowing it, adopt the behavior of contributing to their whatever, to their interest.
Mhm.
And let me show you how this works in the Christian context. Let me show you how this works in the Christian context. I actually wrote some things. I got it from an old sermon that I preached. I said, oh yeah, I'd already laid that out. So let me show you how it works in the Christian context. We had, going back to the scenario in Deerfield, whether it's from the pastors or whether there were, maybe the pastors was on good ground, but then congregants who were Christians who were over these things then said, no, we're not going to have that. Whatever the case may have been, white Christians in Deerfield were presented with an opportunity and they chose whiteness over their Christianity. Now watch this. Here's when that happens though, see his thing, when that happens, it's usually then white interests become Christian interests. You say? Yeah, these are the ones that are in control of the publishing, control of the media, control of whatever. And so white interests become Christian interests. I did a whole thing about debunking whiteness from Christianity. I did that in a Sunday school one time. So what happens then is so that white Christian can present their issues as Christian issues. But those Christian issues are not really Christian issues in the sense that it doesn't affect all Christians. It only affects white Christians. And why is that the case? Because we're still a segregated neighborhood. We're still a segregated country. We're a segregated society. And so guess what? What affects Christian fellowship also as a Christian congregation affects Black people who ain't Christians. We can have the same thing. If there's a housing crisis, we ain't gonna be exempt from it because we're Christians. If there's discrimination with work and pay, some of the same people that go to my church and have to lead that church and go to a job that discriminates against them, even though they're Christian. So watch this. And so what ends up happening then is that in order to quote unquote talk of unity, and this is what they've done. I did this before. I don't have time to get into all of it, but this is what it was done with abortion. I talked about this before. He said, so abortion is not considered a social issue, but then police brutality is, right? And so, what they do then, you take, and that's, why is it that interesting? Because we said in 1979, I think it was, the moral majority began to use that as their platform for political power, right? And so 1964, most Southern white people were Democrats. LBJ passes the Civil Rights Bill. They felt betrayed by that. Like, oh my goodness, you don't give the America's going to hell in a handbasket. You're giving Black folks civil rights, so they started switching over to become Republican. Wow. And the moral majority then this group, the moral majority, led by Jerry Falwell at the time, began to use abortion as a way of to unite Catholics and white Southern Christians for political power only. It wasn't about Christianity. I mean, because one of the things about, I'm just gonna throw this out here, one of the things that the moral majority had as their platform was pornography. I haven't yet to see, let's say, no, let's try to make pornography a political platform. They ain't even tried. So it was for power only. And my thing is this, and so then it becomes easy then, and even us, even black folks even black Christians have fallen into the thing of this false unity. And so yes, abortion is a Christian issue, but guess what? It's deeper than that too, and it's got a lot of other moving pieces, and we'll talk about that another day. But guess what? Police brutality is also an issue that also should be a Christian issue too. The housing market also should be something that Christians are concerned about, right? Like we can talk about discrimination and racism. Should it be a Christian issue too? Why it ain't? Why is that social? And it's part of this abuse where no, we want all other Christians to look out for the interests of white Christians, and we make white Christian interests Christian interests. Black Christian interests and Latino Christian interests, now that's a social, it's Marxism, it's socialism, it's communism, it's foolishness. That perspective is foolishness. This is kingdom business.
And politics is not kingdom business in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what politics, what I describe, here's my definition of politics. My definition of politics, I'm finished. I'm 3 minutes over. My definition of politics is a social philosophy that litigates, right, the passing laws and all that kind of stuff. A social philosophy that litigates who gets power and resources, and that's what it is. And that's and the thing is this, and Christians ought to be affecting these areas, but the problem is when whiteness takes priority over Christianity, we've seen how over and over again white Christians who have the most influence in a political thing will continue to choose whiteness over Christianity, and will try to bless that whiteness as if it is Christianity. And that's exactly what happened with Trump. They literally start changing and fudging on Christian principles to get him in. All of a sudden, divorce didn't matter. All the stuff, all the unchristian biblical practices. All of a sudden, he became the Christian man. They did it before that too. They did it with Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney had a little bit more sense though. He at least was decent, right? But Mitt Romney was a Mormon, and the evangelicals, Billy Graham, all of them had Franklin Graham, and they rightfully so had dismissed Mormons as a cult. But now, when Mitt Romney is to get Obama out, Mitt Romney is God's anointed. And they have consistently done that, where and so part of what I wanted to show, two things. I wanted to show how there is a remnant, though. We can't just give up on him. God has a remnant. He always has a remnant that's going to do his will in any race.
Yes.
But we also need to understand that this culture in America is very demonic, where it has taught white folks, even white Christians, that when it's all said and done, the most sacred thing, is your whiteness. You will sacrifice your Christianity on the altar of your whiteness if it means preserving your way of life.
Yes, that is so true.
All right, y'all didn't warm me out.
All right.
Not the priority, but the whiteness.
Excellent.
Amen.
Excellent Bible study.